Hey, I'm Patrick, and this is Last Records. Today, I'm going through 5 social media challenges that ended in death. And I'll be honest, some of these I had to step away from while researching. From a woman who was guided toward a rooftop, one task at a time, over 49 days, to a man who mixed the wrong things into a cup and suffered the most avoidable ending you'll hear today. It was April 22nd, 2017, in a mid-sized city in Nevada, the kind of place where apartment complexes stretch along flat desert roads and most residents keep to themselves. That's where Tessa Moorfield lived, quietly, mostly alone, in a 4-story building that nobody would have thought twice about. Tessa was 22. She worked part-time at a copy and print shop, picking up whatever shifts came her way during the week. She didn't have many people in her life. Most of her free time was spent alone in her apartment, online. She responded well to structure, someone who felt more settled when she had clear steps to follow and a goal at the end of it. And that's exactly what made her a target. On March 4th, 2017, 49 days before her death, she was contacted through a private messaging platform by an account presenting a 50-day structured challenge, similar to others that had been circulating online at the time, framed as self-improvement, organized, progressive, goal-driven. If I put myself in her position for a second, isolated, spending a lot of time online, responding well to routine, that probably felt like something worth trying. And that's the part that gets me. The first few tasks were nothing. Wake up at a specific time, watch a specific type of content, send a photo confirming you did it. Simple enough that most people wouldn't think twice about it, but photo confirmation was required from day one. Every task, every day, without exception. So before anything turned dark, Tessa had already spent weeks building the habit of documenting what she did and sending it back without questioning it. That was by design. What starts as a simple check-in system becomes the most controlling part. By the time the tasks escalate, compliance is already a reflex. She wasn't doing anything new, just continuing what she had been doing all along. By the second week, the tasks shifted, pull back from people, cut contact, stay awake through specific nights. Her neighbor noticed the blinds hadn't moved in days. Her car sat in the same spot all week. A coworker, who hadn't heard from her in over 2 weeks, sent a message and got nothing back. And with those connections already cut, no one saw the full picture until it was too late. By day 30, the tasks had moved into self-harm territory, still with photo confirmation required after each one. The account kept her compliant through a rotating mix of flattery and quiet threats, praise when she followed through, pressure when she hesitated. It was a system, and the more I look at how it was structured, the harder it is to call it anything other than deliberate, patient, and calculated. She stayed with it through day 40, day 45, all the way to day 49, when the final task was assigned. It came with a specific location, the rooftop of her own building. Just after 3 in the morning on April 22nd, Tessa went up to the rooftop through an unlocked utility door on the top floor, which had not been consistently secured. The rear side of the roof had a low perimeter ledge, roughly 18 inches high, with no railing and nothing between it and the parking lot 47 feet below. 47 feet. That number stopped me cold. She left her phone on the rooftop surface before walking to the ledge. It appeared to have been recording, consistent with how she had been documenting previous tasks. The camera was positioned facing outward and captured her crossing the rooftop and approaching the ledge before the battery died. It didn't capture everything, but it captured enough to establish what happened and in what order. A resident pulling into the rear parking lot after a night shift looked up and saw her standing on the ledge. That person was still in their car when she came off the edge. They were at the scene within seconds of impact. She was unresponsive. At 47 feet onto asphalt, there was nothing to survive. When her devices were reviewed, the full 49-day message thread was recovered, every task assigned, and every photo she sent as confirmation. The account had already been deactivated by the time investigators accessed it, but the records on her end were complete. Investigators concluded the messages played a direct role in the events leading to her death, and the case was ultimately classified as a suicide influenced by prolonged online interaction. No one in her immediate life was found to have any involvement. This one is hard for me to shake, built around someone who just wanted a reason to feel like she was doing something right. And I'll tell you, the next one is something I was not prepared for either. No one pulling strings, just a dare, a camera, and a decision that went wrong in under a minute. It was March 14th, 2016, in a residential neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of area where the same group of people end up on the same porch every weekend without much planning. That's exactly where Darren Prewitt was that night, on the back patio of a friend's house, doing what he did most weekends. Darren was 24. He worked overnight shifts stocking shelves at a wholesale warehouse, which meant he slept through most of the day and was free by evening. His social life ran on a pretty tight loop. Same small group, same neighborhood, same hangouts. He wasn't the kind of person who pushed things forward or came up with ideas. He mostly just showed up and went along with whatever was already happening. And looking back, that might be the most important thing to know about him going into this. That night, someone in the group pulled up a video on their phone, the duct tape challenge. The concept was simple. Wrap someone in duct tape, pin them to a fixed surface, and watch them try to break free. It had been circulating on video platforms for a few weeks, and the group already had a roll of duct tape sitting nearby from a repair job. 2 people went first without any real issue. Both broke free without falling. Both laughed it off. By the time it was Darren's turn, the whole thing felt completely routine. That's the part that's easy to overlook, how much those first 2 attempts set the tone. Nobody stopped to think about the setup because nothing had gone wrong yet. The group taped his arms behind his back, bound his ankles loosely, and secured him to a wooden support post on the patio. 2 phones were already out, one propped against a cooler, one held by a friend for a wider angle. What nobody flagged was where that post was positioned. The back patio of the house sat on a split-level foundation, elevated roughly 6 feet above a concrete utility path running along the rear of the house. The post Darren was taped to sat about 2 feet from the unrailed edge. There was no barrier, no railing, nothing on that side, just open air and a 6-foot drop onto concrete. When someone adjusted the camera angle to get a better shot, they shifted where Darren was standing slightly closer to that edge without anyone catching it. I couldn't get past that part. 1 shift, 2 inches, and everything changed. He started twisting to break free. He built momentum the way the first 2 had, but his ankles came loose faster than expected before his arms had any give at all. With both arms still fully pinned behind his back and his feet suddenly free underneath him, his balance shifted forward instantly, and he had no way to correct it. He had no hands to grab anything, no arms to swing out, nothing to slow the forward pitch. He went over the edge, the full 6-foot drop, head first, with both arms bound behind him the entire way down. He had no ability to reach out, turn, or slow himself in any way. He landed on the concrete utility path below with the full force of the fall concentrated on his head and neck. Both phones captured it. One caught him going over the edge. The other caught the impact from the wider angle. The witnesses on the patio saw it happen in one motion. No warning, no sound before the impact. One friend jumped down immediately. 2 others stood there for several seconds before moving. Darren did not move at all after landing. Both arms pinned behind him the entire way down. That detail stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. He sustained a fatal traumatic brain injury from the head-first impact onto concrete from 6 feet with no ability to break his fall. He lost consciousness at the scene and never regained it. The footage from both phones was handed over and used to reconstruct the full sequence of events. The case was ruled an accidental death. No charges were filed against anyone present. Nobody intended for any of this to happen. And honestly, that is the hardest part for me to sit with. Next is one that genuinely unsettled me. Somewhere in rural Georgia, a man drove himself into the woods voluntarily and never made it back. It was September 6th, 2017, somewhere outside a mid-sized town in rural Georgia, the kind of area where the roads get narrow fast and the tree line swallows everything once you're far enough in. That's where Corin Hadley ended up, not by accident, not by force, but entirely by choice. Corin was 27. He worked part-time as a delivery driver, picking up routes whenever they were available. Irregular hours, inconsistent pay, and a living situation to match. He rented a single room and largely kept to himself. No close family nearby, no one who checked in on him with any regularity. Most of his social life existed online through group chats and shared feeds, which is exactly where he came across the 48-hour missing challenge sometime in late August 2017. The premise was simple: disappear for 48 hours without telling anyone where you went. No contact, no updates. Then reappear and post about it. The reaction, the panic, the confusion, the relief. That was the content. And I think that says a lot about where social media was heading at that point. The performance wasn't the stunt itself. The performance was other people's reaction to it. Corin decided to do it alone. Before he left, he filmed a short video on his phone explaining what he was doing, vague on the details but clear enough in intent, and posted it to his personal feed. He told one coworker in passing that he was going to be off the grid for 2 days. That was the full extent of his preparation. No supplies, no map, no plan beyond driving out, waiting it out, and driving back. On the afternoon of September 6th, he drove roughly 40 minutes outside of town and parked his car off the shoulder of a remote back road that cut through a stretch of dense woodland. The idea was probably to stay close enough to the car that finding his way back wouldn't be an issue. That assumption was the first and most costly mistake he made. He lost phone signal not long after leaving the main road. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped to around 58 degrees Fahrenheit, cooler than he had dressed for. And with the humidity that comes with Georgia woodland at night, it felt significantly colder than that. He had no food, no water, no flashlight, and no way to call anyone, even if he had wanted to. He spent the first night moving to stay warm, which took him further from the road than he realized. By the morning of day 2, the landscape around him looked the same in every direction. He was disoriented and had been for hours without knowing it. He kept moving through day 2, dehydrated, underfed, and increasingly fatigued from a full night and day of exposure. His body was running on very little by the time darkness came again on the second night. Georgia woodland in early September holds heat through the day, but once the sun is gone and the humidity settles, the temperature drops faster than most people expect, especially when the body is already under physical stress. Sometime after dark, on September 7th, he attempted to cross a shallow creek running through the woods, using rocks along the surface as stepping points. The rocks were mossy. He was physically weakened, and his coordination had been compromised by over 30 hours of exposure and dehydration. On the second rock, he lost his footing and went down sideways, striking the right side of his head against a partially submerged flat rock with significant force. He lost consciousness immediately and fell face forward into the creek. The water was roughly 9 inches deep, shallow, but enough to cover the airway of someone face down and unresponsive. The margin between those two things is so small, it's hard to process. He remained there, unresponsive. A driver passing along the back road the following morning noticed his car had been parked in the same spot for 2 days and flagged it. That detail, combined with a video still visible on his personal feed, gave searchers enough to work with in terms of direction and intent. Corin was found face down in the creek approximately 31 hours after he had driven out. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force head trauma followed by drowning while unconscious. The case was ruled an accidental death. No other parties were involved and no foul play was suspected. What gets me about Corin's case is that he posted the video before he left. He documented his own plan. He just never accounted for the part where the plan stopped working. Somewhere along a commuter rail line outside of Chicago, a man with a chest-mounted camera and 2 years of stunt experience thought he had everything figured out. I wish he had. It was June 18th, 2016, along a commuter rail corridor on the outskirts of Chicago, Illinois. The kind of stretch where trains move fast between stops and the surrounding infrastructure, poles, brackets, overhead lines, sits close enough to the tracks that clearance is measured in inches, not feet. That's where Benji Okafor decided to film his next piece of content. Benji was 26. He worked as a freelance videographer, building his personal brand around capturing urban stunts and posting the footage online. He had been doing it for about 2 years and had built a small but consistent following around it. Every outing was content, every location was a set. He didn't separate the stunt from the documentation. The whole point was the footage, and the footage was the whole point. He wasn't reckless in the way most people picture when they hear about something like this. He was methodical. He scouted locations before committing to them. He thought through angles and logistics. He brought equipment, but that's the part that made my stomach drop when I first went through this case, because it wasn't carelessness that brought him here. It was confidence that had never been tested hard enough to fail. In the weeks leading up to June 18th, Benji scouted the commuter rail corridor on 2 separate occasions. He timed the trains between stations. He observed the speed. He looked at the exterior of the cars and identified a recessed door handle he could grip for the duration of the ride. The plan was to ride the outside of a single commuter car between 2 stations less than a mile apart, short enough to control, slow enough to manage. He had done a version of this once before on a different line without incident, which gave him the kind of confidence that's hard to argue with until something goes wrong. He brought a friend, Wes, to operate a second camera from the far end of the departure platform. Benji himself wore a chest-mounted action camera to capture first-person footage for the full duration of the ride. 2 angles, both rolling before the train even left the station. The train pulled out and accelerated faster than Benji had anticipated based on his observation runs. Within the first 600 feet, it was moving at approximately 34 miles per hour, faster than the speed he had built his plan around. He was already committed, pressed flat against the exterior of the 3rd car, both hands gripping the recessed door handle. At that speed, pressed against the outside of a moving train, the margin for anything unexpected shrinks to almost nothing. I don't think that registered for him at the moment. His body position placed his head and left shoulder at the outermost clearance point of the car's exterior. What he hadn't accounted for during his scouting runs was a signal housing bracket mounted on a fixed overhead support structure running alongside the corridor. The bracket sat at a fixed height above the rail bed. During his scouting, Benji had estimated his clearance based on his standing height of 6 feet even. What he didn't factor in was that gripping the door handle from the outside raised his effective height by several inches, closing the gap between his head and the bracket to almost nothing. He scouted that corridor twice and still missed it. That detail made my chest tighten the first time I read it. The bracket made contact across the upper left side of his head and shoulder as the car passed beneath it at full speed. The force of the impact separated him from the car immediately. He fell to the rail bed alongside the track. Wes captured the moment of separation from the platform. A commuter standing near the far end of the platform also witnessed him come off the train. The chest-mounted camera continued recording through the fall and captured the rail bed on impact before the feed cut out. Benji was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head from contact with the fixed overhead bracket at speed, compounded by the fall to the rail bed. The footage from both the platform camera and the chest-mounted camera was recovered and reviewed as part of the record. The case was ruled an accidental death. Wes was interviewed and no charges were filed. All of Benji's preparation, and it still went wrong. And I think that is the cruelest part of this whole case. Last, and this one genuinely disturbed me, a backyard, a dare, a cup, and 3 people who had no idea what they were watching. It was August 22nd, 2015, in a residential neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas, the kind of place where backyards bleed into each other, and weekend evenings tend to stretch longer than anyone plans for. That's where Marlo Tenby spent most of his nights off, outside, with the same small group, doing what they always did. Marlo was 31. He worked dinner shifts as a line cook at a mid-range restaurant, which meant he was rarely home before midnight and rarely in bed before 3 in the morning. Drinking was part of the wind down, not occasionally, consistently. Most nights ended with a few drinks at minimum, and on weekends, it went further than that. He had built his entire social identity around being the one in the group who could handle more than everyone else. And honestly, looking back at how this night unfolded, that reputation might have been the most dangerous thing about him. The neck nomination challenge had been circulating through social feeds since early 2015. The format was simple: film yourself drinking something, post it, then nominate someone else to do the same. It started as a straightforward drinking dare, but escalated quickly as people tried to outdo whoever nominated them. By the time it reached Marlowe's circle, the whole point was to make the person before you look like they played it safe. When his nomination came through on the evening of August 22nd, he didn't hesitate. 3 people were already in his backyard: 2 friends who had been there since early evening, and a neighbor who had wandered over an hour in. Marlowe set his own phone against a cooler, asked one of the friends to hold a second phone for a wider angle, and started putting the mixture together. What he prepared was not a standard drink. He poured what witnesses later estimated at around 8 to 10 shots worth of straight whiskey into a large cup. He added hot sauce, a raw egg, and then he went inside and came back with a standard over-the-counter sleep aid box, punching out 4 tablets and crushing them into the cup before anyone could say much about it. I've had nights where a couple of drinks in, your judgment just stops working the way it should. By the time he reached for those tablets, I think that switch had already flipped. Diphenhydramine, the active compound in most over-the-counter sleep aids, is a central nervous system depressant on its own. Combined with a large volume of alcohol, it compounds the sedative effect significantly, slowing breathing and central nervous system activity in a way that neither substance would reach alone at those quantities. In someone with a high alcohol tolerance, the early warning signs are easier to miss because the body is already conditioned to push through them. One of the friends told him the mixture looked wrong and suggested he leave out the tablets. Marlowe dismissed it and finished preparing the cup. Both phones were already recording. He drank the entire mixture in one continuous effort, lasting roughly 40 seconds. He stayed upright afterward, talked, seemed fine. The group settled back into the evening and nobody flagged anything for the first 20 minutes. Around the 20-minute mark, his speech became harder to follow. He sat down heavily in a lawn chair about 12 feet from the back door. One friend assumed he was drunk and suggested they move inside. Marlowe declined and stayed in the chair. By the 35-minute mark, his head dropped forward and he stopped responding to his name. All 3 witnesses were present when it happened. His breathing became shallow and irregular over the next several minutes. One friend shook his shoulders repeatedly and got no response. Under the exterior light, his lips had taken on a pale coloration that one witness described as wrong. Roughly 50 minutes after finishing the drink, his breathing stopped. The neighbor was the first to recognize that what they were watching had moved well beyond someone sleeping off a bad decision. By the time that recognition landed, it had already been too late for longer than any of them realized. Marlowe was confirmed dead at the scene. The cause of death was ruled acute respiratory and central nervous system depression from the combined volume of alcohol and diphenhydramine at levels considered fatal. The mixture was reconstructed from witness accounts and the remaining contents of the cup. Both phones were recovered and reviewed as part of the record. The case was closed as an accidental death. No one present was charged. I don't know how that one friend who spoke up felt afterward, but I think about, you said the right thing. You were standing right there, and it still went the way it went.